I still remember the exact sound my phone made that Tuesday night. Not because it was loud, because it changed everything. I had just poured myself a cup of Sanka coffee and settled into the old oak chair by my kitchen window in Beaverdale. Rain tapped softly against the glass. The weather forecast had warned about another damp front moving across central Iowa, and my right knee had been complaining since lunchtime. At 61, my joints usually knew what the meteorologist hadn't announced yet. My phone buzzed once. I smiled before picking it up. 3 days before your daughter's wedding, every message feels important. Then I read it. Dad, please don't ask about Chase's parents anymore. They won't be at the wedding. It's better if you don't meet them. I read it again, then a third time. I even adjusted my reading glasses thinking maybe I'd misunderstood a word. I hadn't. I sat there with the coffee growing colder in my hand. The kitchen suddenly felt much quieter than it had a minute earlier. 9 years earlier, after Norah died, I'd promised myself that Emily would never feel like she'd lost both parents. I'd worked overtime at the post office, cashed out vacation days, fixed my own roof, learned to braid hair from YouTube videos even though I wasn't very good at it. I'd paid for braces, college, her first apartment deposit, the transmission on her Honda Civic, half the wedding venue deposit, the rehearsal dinner. Yet somehow, knowing who my future son-in-law's parents were had become too much to ask. I looked toward the fireplace. Nora's picture sat where it always had. She was laughing in that photo wearing the blue sweater she'd insisted wasn't flattering. I smiled despite myself. You were wrong about that sweater, I said quietly. The room, of course, didn't answer. After a while, I typed back, okay, just one word, no questions, no guilt, no argument. I set the phone face down. The silence that followed somehow hurt more than the message itself. Emily called about 30 minutes later. Dad, hey sweetheart, you aren't upset, are you? There was hesitation in her voice, not concern exactly. More like she was checking whether a problem had stayed contained. I said, okay. I know, it's just, she sighed. Chase's family has complicated history. Everybody does. It's different. I wasn't asking for medical records, I said with a small laugh. I just figured parents usually meet before their kids get married. Another pause. You'll understand someday. I almost smiled. I hope so. She quickly changed the subject. Don't forget dinner tomorrow. I won't. Love you. Love you too. She hung up first. I stared at the dark screen. She'd said love you, but she'd never answered my question. The next evening, I drove my old Ford F-150 into West Des Moines. The truck wasn't pretty anymore. The paint had faded. There was a dent behind the passenger door from backing into my own mailbox 7 years earlier. It still ran. Kind of like me. The restaurant Chase had picked overlooked Jordan Creek. It was modern, all-polished wood, hanging lights and servers who somehow knew everybody's wine preferences. Emily hugged me. She looked beautiful, happy, nervous. She'd inherited Nora's smile. For a moment, I forgot every uncomfortable text message. Then Chase arrived. He shook my hand with both of his. Mr. Whitaker, you can call me Rob. I appreciate everything you've done for Emily. His smile was polished. Too polished. The kind you practice. Dinner stayed pleasant through appetizers. Emily talked about flower deliveries. I complained about Iowa weather. Chase told a story about a commercial property deal that made everyone laugh. If someone had walked by our table, they'd have thought we were an ordinary family. Maybe that's why I chose that moment. So, I said casually while setting down my fork, when do I finally get to meet your folks? Emily immediately looked at Chase. Not naturally, automatically, like she'd been waiting for him. He dabbed his mouth with a napkin before speaking. Rob, his voice stayed calm. My family has some old wounds. I nodded. I understand. Emily understands them too. He leaned forward just slightly. I hope you care enough about her not to dig into things that hurt people. The words were polite. The meaning wasn't. He hadn't answered me. He'd turned my question into something selfish. I noticed Emily watching me, waiting, as though the next move belonged to me. I could have pushed. Instead, I asked quietly, so they're definitely not coming. Emily spoke before Chase could. No. Then she added something that landed harder than she realized. They come from a different world. I frowned. What does that mean? She looked embarrassed. She searched for the right words. I don't want anything to get awkward. Awkward. Such a harmless little word. Except I knew exactly what she meant. She wasn't talking about Chase's parents. She was talking about me, the retired postal supervisor. The man whose jacket came from J.C. Penney instead of Nordstrom. The man who still drove an old pickup. The man whose knees stiffened whenever he stood after dinner. For the first time since Norah died, I wondered if Emily had started seeing me through someone else's eyes. I forced a smile. Well, I suppose we all want the day to go smoothly. Relief washed across her face. She thought the conversation was over. So did Chase. Driving home, I took the slower route through Beaverdale. The neighborhood looked the same as it always had. Kids riding bicycles. Porch lights glowing. Somebody grilling despite the drizzle. Normal life. Exactly the kind of life Norah had loved. I parked in my driveway but didn't go inside right away. Instead, I sat in the truck with the engine ticking as it cooled. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe Chase really did have family issues. Maybe Emily was protecting everyone. I wanted to believe that. I truly did. Around 10 that night, my laptop chimed. The wedding planner. Probably another reminder about rehearsal times. I opened the email without thinking, then frowned. The subject line read, "Updated seating draft." She'd apparently sent it by mistake before sending the final version to the bridal party. I almost closed it. Instead, I glanced through the tables. Bridesmaids, groomsmen, Carol, my name. Then my eyes stopped. Table 4, 2 names, G. Mercer, M. Mercer. I blinked, scrolled back up, then down again. No, I wasn't imagining it. Mercer. Not Merritt, not attending, not blank. 2 reserved seats. I leaned closer to the screen. My heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. That's always been my curse. When something feels terribly wrong, I become calmer. I printed the seating chart, laid it beside my coffee cup. Read every line again. The planner hadn't marked them absent. She'd assigned them seats. Someone expected those 2 people to be there, which meant someone had lied. I looked toward Norah's photograph. The house felt unusually still. Outside, rainwater dripped steadily from the gutters. Inside, I stared at 2 names I'd never heard before 20 seconds earlier. G. Mercer, M. Mercer. I picked up the paper again. Then I quietly spoke into the empty living room. Something's wrong, Norah. I swallowed. And I think our daughter is standing right in the middle of it. The next morning, I almost convinced myself to let it go. I woke up at 6 like I always did, even though I'd been retired for almost 4 years. Old habits don't disappear just because your paycheck does. I shuffled into the kitchen, fed the robin that visited my back deck every morning, and listened to the local radio while scrambling 2 eggs. By 8 o'clock, I had a legal pad sitting beside my coffee. On the top line, I'd written one question. Who are the Mercers? I stared at it for a full minute. Then I crossed it out. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe Chase's family had reasons they didn't want strangers digging into their lives. Maybe I was becoming one of those old men who couldn't accept that their children had grown up. I folded the legal pad shut. I'm done, I told myself. 5 minutes later, I grabbed my truck keys. The Polk County Assessor's Office wasn't exactly where most people would spend a Wednesday morning, but I'd spent 36 years working for the Postal Service. I knew one thing about government records. Most ordinary information wasn't secret. You just had to know where to look. The woman behind the public records counter smiled politely. Can I help you? I'm trying to locate a property owner. She slid a keyboard toward me. You can search the public database right there. No questions. No suspicious looks. Just public information available to anyone willing to sit down and search. I typed in Mercer. More than 80 results appeared. So much for being clever, I muttered. The first address belonged to a retired couple in Ames. The second had been sold 5 years earlier. Another Mercer owned farmland nearly an hour away. None of them meant anything. After almost 90 minutes, my neck hurt from leaning over the monitor. I rubbed my knee and laughed quietly. What are you doing, Rob? The woman at the counter looked over. You okay? Just realizing retirement gives a man too much free time. She chuckled. You'd be surprised how many people come in here trying to solve family mysteries. I hope most of them find happier endings. She smiled kindly. I hope so too. I stopped for lunch at a small diner on Hickman Road. The waitress recognized me. The usual, you remember, you always order the turkey sandwich and ask for extra pickles. Guess I'm predictable. She poured fresh coffee. You look like you've got something on your mind. My daughter gets married Saturday. Her face brightened. That's wonderful. It should be. The words slipped out before I could stop them. She didn't pry. She simply refilled my cup and said, sometimes weddings bring out strange things in families. Funny how complete strangers can say exactly what you need to hear. By early afternoon, I'd decided the search had been foolish. I was halfway home when my phone rang. Carol, Nora's younger sister, never called just to chat. You sound tired, she said the moment I answered. I've been chasing ghosts. What kind? I told her everything. The text message, dinner, the seating chart, the name Mercer. She stayed quiet for several seconds. Then she asked one question. Did you say Mercer? Yeah, Marcia Mercer. I don't know. Silence again. Longer this time. Finally, she spoke slower than usual. Rob. I haven't heard that last name in years. Something tightened in my chest. Why? You remember all those papers after Norah died? Of course I remembered. Boxes of paperwork. Lawyers. Insurance forms. Settlement agreements I'd signed because I couldn't afford years of court battles. Carol continued. I could swear Marcia's maiden name was Mercer. I pulled onto the shoulder without realizing it. What? I may be wrong. No. You don't say something like that unless you're remembering something. I remember because I hated her. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Carol. I think Prairie Willow's administrator was named Marcia Mercer before she got married. The world outside my windshield suddenly felt very quiet. Cars kept driving past. A lawn crew trimmed bushes across the street. Life continued. Mine didn't. I drove back toward the assessor's office instead of home. This time I searched differently. Not Mercer. Mercer Holdings. Nothing. Then I tried LLC. Several companies appeared. Most weren't relevant. One caught my attention. Mercer Family Holdings, LLC. Registered address. Ankeny. I clicked deeper. The listed managing member. Glenn A. Mercer. Not Merritt. Mercer. The address sat less than 20 minutes from my own house. 20 minutes. Emily had told me Chase's parents wouldn't be at the wedding. She'd never mentioned they practically lived around the corner. Rain started falling again as I drove north toward Ankeny. Not heavy rain, the kind that hangs in the air like mist. My knee throbbed every time I moved from the gas pedal to the brake. By the time I reached a Hy-Vee, I'd had enough. I parked, bought a bottle of water, 2 pain relievers, and the largest coffee they sold. The young cashier smiled. Long day. You have no idea. She laughed politely. I carried everything back to the truck. For several minutes, I just sat there drinking coffee, watching people load groceries, watching parents buckle children into SUVs, watching ordinary life continue. I am entirely too old. I muttered aloud to be sitting in a grocery store parking lot playing detective. I almost started the engine. Instead, I drove the remaining mile. The neighborhood surprised me. Tree-lined streets, large brick homes, fresh landscaping, not flashy, quiet wealth. I parked across the street. Nothing happened for nearly 15 minutes. I began wondering whether I'd made another mistake. Then a black BMW pulled into the driveway. Chase climbed out. He wasn't alone. Emily stepped out from the passenger side. She laughed at something he said. The front door opened. A woman in her 60s hurried outside. Emily hugged her. Not politely. Not formally. The kind of hug you give someone you've known for a while. A tall, gray-haired man followed. Chase slapped him on the shoulder. They looked completely comfortable together. Like family. Not strangers hiding painful history. Family. I felt something sink inside me. Emily knew. She hadn't simply repeated Chase's story. She had looked me in the eye and lied. About 20 minutes later, the 4 of them climbed into 2 vehicles. I stayed several cars behind. Not because I wanted to spy, because I needed to understand. They stopped at a little diner tucked between a hardware store and a pharmacy. I didn't go inside. Instead, I took a booth near the front window where I could see reflections in the glass. Most of their conversation disappeared beneath clattering dishes and coffee cups. But now and then a sentence drifted across the room. After the wedding, he'll come around. The house is the cleanest asset. I frowned. House. Then another voice. Probably Glenn. Old cases don't come back unless someone pays to dig. My stomach tightened. I couldn't tell what case they meant. But something about the way he said it felt rehearsed. Like experience talking. The waitress brought my pie. I barely touched it. Across the room, Chase removed a folder from his briefcase. He slid several papers toward Emily. She skimmed them for only a few seconds, then signed. No hesitation, no questions, just signed. When she turned the pages, I caught a few words from where I sat. Family transfer, marital planning. At the bottom of another page, Mercer Holdings. I couldn't read anything else. But I didn't need to. Whatever she had signed involved his family. Not mine, not yet, still. My instincts told me this wasn't about wedding flowers or honeymoon reservations. Then I heard something that froze me in place. Marcia lowered her voice, almost a whisper. Yet the words carried just enough. Prairie Willow taught us one thing. She smiled. People forget when they're tired enough. The fork slipped from my hand onto the plate. Prairie Willow. I hadn't spoken those 2 words aloud in years. That was where Norah had gone after her hip surgery. That was where she died 7 days later. The sound of dishes faded around me. For one impossible second, I could almost hear the phone call I'd received at 2:14 that morning 9 years ago. Mr. Whitaker, I'm sorry. There were complications. I paid my bill without finishing the pie. I drove home in silence. The house smelled exactly the way it always did. Old books, coffee, cedar from the hallway closet. I walked straight to the linen closet where I'd stored the box I'd promised myself never to open again. Norah's file box, hospital records, insurance papers, letters from attorneys, the settlement agreement. I carried it to the kitchen table. Dust floated into the light as I lifted the lid. My hands shook, not from age, from memory. One folder after another, medical bills, medication logs, legal correspondence. Then halfway down the stack, a faded internal memo, yellow with age. I stared at the signature. My breathing stopped. At the bottom of the page in neat blue ink were 5 words I'd never expected to see again. Marcia Merritt, Administrative Director. I slowly lowered myself into the chair. Outside rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, the past had just walked back into my life. I barely slept that night. The rain had finally stopped, but every time the house settled with its usual creaks, I opened my eyes and looked toward the hallway. Norah's file box sat on the kitchen table exactly where I'd left it. For 9 years, it had lived in the linen closet behind extra towels and an old Christmas tablecloth. I told myself I kept it because throwing it away felt wrong. The truth was simpler. I wasn't ready to read it again. At 6:30, I made coffee, toasted 2 slices of wheat bread, and sat down across from the cardboard box. Its edges had softened with age. Norah's handwriting still covered the lid. Medical, insurance, don't lose. I smiled despite everything. Still organizing my life, I whispered. Then I opened it. The first folder held hospital invoices. The second was physical therapy paperwork after her hip replacement. The third contained sympathy cards that I'd never had the heart to throw away. Under those sat a thick envelope from the attorney who handled the settlement. I remembered every meeting, every bill, every conversation that ended with the same sentence. Mr. Whitaker continuing this case could cost tens of thousands of dollars. Back then, I'd still been paying Emily's tuition, the mortgage, medical bills that insurance hadn't covered. I simply couldn't afford to fight forever. So I'd signed, not because I believed Prairie Willow had done nothing wrong, because grief had made me tired enough to surrender. Now Marcia's words echoed in my head. People forget when they're tired enough. I closed my eyes. Maybe that hadn't been a casual remark after all. Maybe it had been a philosophy. By mid-morning, the kitchen table had disappeared beneath stacks of paper. Medication logs, insurance correspondence, copies of incident reports, letters between lawyers. Then I found something I'd completely forgotten. An internal memo. The paper had yellowed around the edges. Across the bottom was the signature I'd recognized the night before. Marcia Merritt, Administrative Director. My fingers lingered over the blue ink. I wasn't looking at proof of a crime. Not even close. But I was looking at proof that Chase's mother hadn't simply crossed paths with my family years ago. She had been one of the people running the place where Norah died. That wasn't coincidence anymore. It was connection. Around 10 o'clock, I called Carol. She answered on the second ring. Tell me you found something. I found Marcia's signature. Carol didn't speak. I knew it, she finally said. You really remembered her. I remembered because she scared people. Scared the nurses, the families. Even the lawyers acted differently whenever her name came up. I leaned back in my chair. Why didn't we keep fighting? Carol sighed. You were exhausted. So was I. They delayed everything. Records took months. Employees suddenly couldn't remember conversations. She paused. And then they offered enough money to cover the bills. I knew exactly what she meant. Not enough to feel like justice. Just enough to make survival possible. They didn't convince us they were innocent, Carol said quietly. They convinced us we couldn't afford to prove they weren't. Before hanging up, she surprised me. You should talk to Patricia. I frowned. Who's Patricia? Patricia Wells. One of the nurses, Carol laughed softly. If she's still alive, she'll remember every crooked administrator she ever worked under. You think she'll talk? If anyone will, it's Patricia. Finding Patricia took most of the afternoon. She lived in a senior apartment complex in Urbandale. The building wasn't fancy, but flower pots lined the entrance, and someone had hung tiny American flags along the walkway. By the time I climbed the front steps, my knee was protesting loudly. An elderly man watering tomatoes pointed toward apartment 214. You're looking for Patty. I hope so. Tell her Frank says she's still cheating at bingo. He grinned before returning to his tomatoes. Patricia opened the door with a bright red lipstick that somehow made her look younger than 72. A silver walker stood beside her. She studied me for several seconds. You look familiar. I'm Rob Whitaker. Nothing. My wife was Norah. Her expression changed immediately. Oh, she stepped aside. You'd better come in. Her apartment smelled like lemon polish and fresh coffee. Family photographs covered one wall. A tiny radio played old country music in the background. Without asking, she placed 2 cookies on a plate between us. They're stale, she warned. I baked them Monday. They'll still beat hospital food. She laughed. I like you already. After a few minutes of polite conversation, I finally asked the question that had brought me there. Did you know Marcia Merritt? Patricia stopped smiling. Oh, I knew Marcia. She folded her hands. Too well. For the next hour, she talked while I mostly listened. Marcia rarely raised her voice. She didn't need to. She walked the halls in high heels that clicked against the tile floors. Whenever employees heard those footsteps, conversation stopped. Everyone straightened up. Nobody wanted to become the next target. Glenn handled business, Patricia said. Marcia handled fear. I wrote that sentence down. Then Patricia said something else. Your wife wasn't the only family that asked difficult questions. I looked up. There were medication mistakes. She nodded slowly. More than there should have been. Were they covered up? They were cleaned up. The wording caught my attention. Cleaned up. Reports rewritten. Times corrected. Missing initials added later. She looked me straight in the eye. I never saw anyone forge medical charts, but I saw plenty of paperwork become tidier. She stood carefully, shuffled toward an old filing cabinet and removed a thin folder. I kept a few things. Inside wasn't confidential medical information. Instead, there were staff newsletters, newspaper clippings, handwritten diary notes, and copies of memos employees had received years earlier. One memo immediately caught my eye. Its subject line read, "Reconcile medication logs before outside review." At the bottom, Marcia Merritt, Administrative Director. Patricia smiled without humor. I kept that because it never sat right with me. It isn't proof of wrongdoing. I know, but it proves how they thought. Exactly. No smoking gun, just another piece of a pattern. As we talked, another unexpected name came up. Did Chase ever come around? Patricia nodded. When he was 15 or 16. What was he doing there? Helping his parents. She gave a dry laugh. At least that's what they called it. She remembered seeing him in the office after school, making copies, running errands, answering phones. Then she frowned. There was one incident. What happened? A resident's daughter couldn't find paperwork for personal belongings. And I later found Chase practicing someone's signature on scratch paper. I blinked. Did anyone report it? He was a teenager. His parents owned the place. No one wanted to lose a paycheck over something everyone called harmless. Patricia slowly shook her head. Sometimes people don't become dishonest overnight. They grow up believing rules belong to other people. That sentence stayed with me. As I prepared to leave, Patricia reached into the folder one last time. I almost forgot. She handed me a photocopy of a civil complaint filed 3 years earlier. The names at the top made my stomach tighten. Chase Merritt, Glenn Mercer. The lawsuit involved an elderly widow. According to the complaint, she'd been pressured into selling her home to an LLC for far below market value. The case had eventually settled. No admission of wrongdoing. Just another quiet ending. Another family too tired to keep fighting. I folded the document carefully. This wasn't about Norah anymore. Or at least, it wasn't only about Norah. Patricia walked me to the apartment door. Before I stepped outside, she rested one hand on my sleeve. Rob, I turned. If your daughter marries into that family, she looked at me with the certainty of someone who had watched too many lives fall apart. They won't just take your house. A long silence settled between us. Then she finished. They'll teach her to call it love. I drove home with the radio off. For the first time since Emily announced her engagement, I wasn't asking whether something was wrong. I was asking how much time I had left to stop it. By Thursday morning, my kitchen looked less like a kitchen and more like the back room of a failing law office. Papers covered the table. Norah's file box sat open beside my cold coffee. Patricia's memo was clipped to the civil complaint against Chase and Glenn. The seating chart with G. Mercer and M. Mercer had a yellow sticky note on it because my hands had started shaking every time I looked at those names. I knew enough to be angry, but I also knew enough to be dangerous to myself. There is a kind of anger that makes a man feel clear-headed when he is not. I had seen it at the post office plenty of times. A supervisor gets humiliated, a driver gets written up, a customer starts yelling, and suddenly somebody who had been steady for 20 years says the one sentence that ruins his job. I couldn't afford that. Not with Emily, not with Norah's name. So I called Denise Kaplan. Denise had handled my updated will 2 years earlier. She was 57, sharp as a paper cut, and had a way of looking over her glasses that made grown men sit up straighter. Her office was downtown Des Moines on the 5th floor of a brick building that smelled like old carpet and printer toner. When I walked in carrying Nora's file box, Denise didn't smile. She pointed to the chair. "Sit down before your knee gives out." That obvious. "Rob, you're walking like a man who lost a fight with a staircase." I lowered myself into the chair and placed the box on her desk. "I need you to tell me if I'm crazy." She opened the box. Those are never my favorite consultations. For almost 40 minutes she read while I talked. I told her about Emily's text, the dinner, the seating chart, the Ankeny house, the diner, Prairie Willow, Patricia Wells, the old memo, the new civil complaint. Denise did not interrupt much. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally circling something twice. When I finished, she leaned back and removed her glasses. "Rob, that bad? It's bad enough that you need to be careful." I felt my jaw tighten. "You think I'm imagining this?" "No." She tapped the papers. "I think there are patterns here. I think there are financial red flags. I think Chase and his family have avoided full transparency with your daughter. I also think if you walk into that rehearsal dinner and accuse these people of killing your wife, they will make you look unstable before dessert." The words hit harder than I expected. Unstable. Yes, because I'm the widower. Because you're the widower. Because you're the father of the bride. Because you followed them to Ankeny. Because grief gives dishonest people an easy costume to put on you. I stared at Nora's memo. Denise's voice softened. "You don't need a scene, Rob. You need proof. I have proof. You have pieces. Pieces matter, but they need to be used correctly." I rubbed both hands over my face. "What do I do?" She pushed the seating chart back toward me. "First, you stopped chasing them." "I wasn't." She raised one eyebrow. I closed my mouth. "Second, she said we make this about current financial disclosure, not old grief. But Prairie Willow may matter. It may matter a lot. But if your immediate goal is protecting Emily and your assets, then the cleanest doorway is financial transparency." I looked up. Prenup, asset review, debt disclosure, LLC disclosure. Anything Chase refuses to reveal becomes useful. For the first time in 2 days, my anger had somewhere to go besides my chest. Denise slid a blank pad toward me. "Tell Emily you want to give her a wedding gift." "What kind? A legal consultation? Family planning? Protecting her future? Make it sound boring and generous." "That feels dishonest." "It is strategic. I've never been good at that." "I know," she said. "That's why you hired me." I almost laughed. Almost. Then my phone buzzed. "Emily." I looked at Denise. She nodded once. "Answer it." I did. Before I could say hello, Emily's voice came through tight and sharp. "Dad, what did you do?" My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "Chase says you were outside his parents' house." Denise closed her eyes like she had already expected this. I stood slowly. "Emily, you followed us." "I saw something that concerned me." "You followed us," she repeated louder. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to learn your daughter lied about people living 20 minutes away?" Silence. Then she said, "You don't understand." "No, I don't. You're trying to ruin this because you don't trust anyone. That isn't fair. You never moved on after Mom. That one landed." I gripped the phone harder. Emily kept going, her voice cracking now. "And now you're dragging her into this too." I looked at the memo on Denise's desk. "I didn't drag your mother into anything. Mom would be ashamed of you." For a second, the whole office disappeared. I saw Emily at 20 years old standing beside Nora's grave in a black dress too thin for the October wind. I saw myself putting one arm around her while she shook so hard I thought she might fall. I had spent 9 years trying not to lose that girl. And there she was on the phone, sounding like a stranger repeating someone else's script. Denise watched me carefully. I took one breath. Then another. "You're angry," I said. "Of course I'm angry. Come over tonight." "No." "Bring Chase." "Absolutely not. I want to offer you both something." That paused her. "What?" "A wedding gift. Legal planning. If you two are starting a life together, maybe I should help you do it right." There was suspicion in her silence. "What does that mean?" "It means Denise Kaplan can meet with all of us tomorrow morning. We'll talk about the house inheritance, anything that needs protecting." "You're serious?" "I am. And you'll stop digging." Denise's eyes sharpened. I did not answer the way Emily wanted. "I'll stop guessing." That was true enough. "Oh." Chase arrived at Denise's office Friday morning in a suit that probably cost more than my first car. Emily came in beside him, pale and tired, with her engagement ring catching the fluorescent light every time she moved her hand. Chase smiled at Denise. "Thank you for making time. Rob can be very protective. Denise didn't smile back. That's often a parent's job. He gave a small chuckle. Of course. I sat quietly. That was the hardest part. Chase expected anger. He expected accusations. He was ready for an emotional old man. So I gave him paperwork instead. Denise began calmly. Rob has asked me to help clarify estate and asset planning before the wedding. If any family property is ever transferred, we want Emily protected. Chase leaned forward. Absolutely, I've been saying the same thing. Emily glanced at him. He continued too quickly. Transparency is important, especially with a home involved. Denise made a note. What home are you referring to? Chase blinked once. Rob's. I kept my face still. Denise nodded. What is your understanding of its value? Well, Beaverdale has gone up. Depending on condition, maybe 300, 350. Emily looked at me then. I could see the question in her face. How did he know that? Denise turned a page. Is there a mortgage? Chase smiled. That would be Rob's information. But you asked about anticipated transfer timing, correct? His smile thinned. I don't think I used those words. No, Denise said. I did. The room went quiet. Then Denise placed a clean form in front of him. For a prenuptial agreement involving potential family assets, we would need full disclosure of debt business interests, LLC connections, pending claims, and any family entities that might affect Emily after marriage. Chase's fingers stopped moving. Emily looked between them. What LLC connections? Chase laughed lightly. Standard legal language, Em. Denise kept her tone pleasant. Mercer Family Holdings LLC would be one example. The color left his face just enough for me to notice. He recovered quickly. I don't know why that would be relevant. Then disclosure should be simple. His jaw worked. That's private family business. Emily's voice was quiet. Chase. He turned to her instantly soft. Baby, this is exactly what I meant. Your father is turning a gift into an interrogation. I almost spoke. Denise touched the edge of my sleeve under the table, so I stayed silent. Chase stood. I need to take a call. His phone had not rung. He stepped into the hallway, but the old office door did not close all the way. His voice dropped. Not enough. They're asking about Mercer Holdings. Emily's head turned slowly. Chase continued from the hall. No, I didn't tell her that part. The silence in the room became a living thing. Emily stared at the door, then at Denise, then at me. What part? She whispered. I wanted to reach for her hand. I didn't. A few seconds later, Chase came back in smiling. But Emily had changed. Not completely. Not enough. But something had cracked. I need time, she said suddenly. Chase froze. What? I said I need time. Emily, don't let them. I need time. She grabbed her purse and walked out. Chase looked at me then, and for the first time the politeness was gone. You don't know what you're doing. I stood carefully feeling every inch of pain in my knee. No, I said, but I'm learning. That night at 9:37, Denise called. I had just turned off the porch light. What did you find? I asked. She didn't waste words. Mercer Holdings is tied to a bridge loan application. What does that mean? It means someone is borrowing against expected money. My mouth went dry. What expected money? An anticipated family asset transfer. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Mean? That's the implication. And Emily? Denise was quiet for half a second. Long enough. Rob, this isn't just a bad fiance. I looked again at Norah's picture on the mantle. Denise finished in a voice as cold as Iowa rain. This is a business plan, and your daughter is part of the paperwork. By Friday evening, the rehearsal dinner looked exactly the way Emily had dreamed it would. Soft amber lighting, white tablecloths, fresh flowers lined the center of every table. The private dining room at the steakhouse overlooked a small pond where the last light of the Iowa sunset reflected across the water. If someone had walked in without knowing our story, they would have seen nothing but smiling families preparing for a wedding. I arrived 10 minutes early. Old habit. My navy blazer had been pressed the night before. It wasn't expensive, but it was clean. Norah had bought it for my retirement party, insisting that every man deserved one jacket that made him stand a little straighter. As I stepped inside, my knee reminded me that standing straight had become more complicated over the years. Emily looked up first. For a moment, I saw the little girl who used to wave from elementary school concerts until she spotted me in the audience. Then the moment disappeared. Hi, Dad. You look beautiful. Thank you. Neither of us hugged. That hurt more than I expected. Guests slowly filled the room. Co-workers, bridesmaids, groomsmen, a few cousins from both sides. Everyone chatted comfortably, unaware that beneath the polite conversations, several people already carried secrets that could destroy tomorrow's wedding. Then Chase walked in, confident, relaxed. He kissed Emily on the forehead before shaking hands around the room. His parents arrived a few minutes later, not as absent family members, not as mysterious relatives who couldn't attend, as old family friends. I watched Chase introduce them. This is Glenn, and this is Marcia. No last name, no explanation. Just enough truth wrapped around a lie. When Glenn reached my table, he offered his hand. Nice to finally meet you. I looked at him for 2 seconds before shaking it. You too. His smile never moved. Neither did mine. Just before everyone sat down, Carol slipped into the room. She wore a dark green jacket and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had stopped worrying about other people's opinions decades ago. She leaned toward me. You ready? I don't know. She squeezed my shoulder. Good. I frowned. Good. The people who enjoy these moments too much usually become the villains. I couldn't argue with that. Dinner began quietly. Steaks arrived. Wine glasses clinked. People laughed over harmless stories about college roommates and wedding disasters. I barely tasted my food. Across the room, Marcia laughed at something one of Chase's business associates said. She looked comfortable, too comfortable, as though Prairie Willow had happened to someone else. Denise arrived 20 minutes later. She wasn't invited. She wasn't crashing the event either. She simply walked in carrying a leather briefcase, nodded politely to the event coordinator, and came straight toward me. Everything about her said attorney. Professional, calm, prepared. She placed several large envelopes on the table beside me. No surprises, she whispered. Everything inside is public record or privately owned by you. I nodded. Thank you. You only get one chance to do this correctly. I know. And remember, she looked directly at me. Let them speak. Half an hour later, Chase stood to give a toast. He raised his glass. When I met Emily, I knew I'd found someone who believed in honesty. I almost looked away. Family. Several guests smiled. And building a future based on trust. Carol quietly muttered under her breath. That's rich. Laughter rippled through the room as Chase finished his speech. Everyone applauded. Then I stood, not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly enough that conversations naturally faded. I'd like to say something. Emily looked nervous. Dad, it'll only take a minute. I waited until the room became quiet. Then I spoke exactly the way Denise and I had practiced. When Emily first told me about this wedding, I was excited about meeting the family she was joining. I looked toward Glenn and Marcia. I later learned they supposedly couldn't attend. A few guests exchanged puzzled looks. I continued. Imagine my surprise when I discovered they were not only attending, I glanced around the room, but had been living less than 20 minutes from my house. Silence. Chase smiled tightly. There seems to be some misunderstanding. I don't think there is. Marcia laughed softly. We're private people. I respect privacy. I held up the seating chart. I don't respect deception. The room became very still. Denise quietly handed me the envelopes. I walked around the room one person at a time. One for Emily, one for Chase, one for Glenn, one for Marcia, one for the officiant, 2 for Chase's business associates, 1 for Emily's maid of honor, whose parents had known our family for years. Nobody opened them immediately. I returned to my seat. You can read them now? Emily opened hers first. Inside were copies of public records, the Mercer family holdings registration, the civil complaint involving the elderly widow, the Prairie Willow administrative memo bearing Marcia's signature, a short letter from Patricia Wells confirming she had worked at Prairie Willow and had preserved publicly shareable staff documents. Nothing confidential, nothing exaggerated, just facts. Across the room, Chase's smile disappeared. This proves nothing, Glenn said. It proves more than you wanted people to know, Denise answered calmly. Marcia folded her papers. This is harassment. No, Denise replied. It's documentation. Chase suddenly stepped forward. This is because he can't let go of the past. His finger pointed toward me. He blames my family for his wife's death. I answered quietly. I blame your family for hiding from it. Emily looked from one face to another. Chase. He turned immediately. Don't. Dad. Emily. Chase interrupted. They're manipulating you. I watched her hands. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring at the Mercer Holdings documents. The dining room doors opened. Every head turned. Patricia Wells entered slowly with her walker. Bright red lipstick. Gray sweater. Perfect posture despite her age. Carol stepped beside her. Patricia looked directly at Marcia. Hello, Marcia. The smile left Marcia's face. I haven't seen you in years. Patricia nodded. Not since Prairie Willow. No one spoke. Patricia continued. I always wondered whether you'd ever tell people who you used to be. Marcia stood. I don't know this woman. Patricia gave a dry laugh. You knew me well enough to rewrite 3 of my incident reports. A murmur spread through the room. Glenn stepped forward. That's enough. Patricia didn't even look at him. You always did let other people clean up your messes. Chase lost his composure first. This is ridiculous. He grabbed Emily's wrist. We're leaving. Emily looked down at his hand, then back at him. Let go. He tightened his grip. I said we're leaving. Every conversation in the room had stopped. Emily slowly pulled her arm free. No. He stared at her. What? I said no. She looked at the papers again, then at Marcia, then at Glenn. Finally, she turned toward me, her eyes filled with tears. Dad, my chest tightened. She held up the Prairie Willow memo with trembling hands. What is this? I didn't answer immediately. She deserved the truth. Not revenge, not anger. The truth. What happened to Mom? The room was silent enough that I could hear the air conditioner running overhead. I looked at Nora's photograph on the lock screen of my phone before meeting my daughter's eyes. My wife went into Prairie Willow to recover from surgery. I swallowed. She never came home. Emily's shoulders began to shake. I continued quietly. I spent years wondering whether I had imagined my doubts. I looked directly at Glenn and Marcia. They settled the case. They changed names. They moved on. Then I looked back at Emily. But I never forgot your mother. No one spoke. Even Chase had gone silent. The rehearsal dinner had ended without anyone announcing it. Not because of shouting, not because of a fight, because the weight of the truth had become heavier than the celebration. Part 6. The wedding that didn't happen. Nobody officially canceled the rehearsal dinner. It simply ended. People stopped eating. Servers quietly cleared untouched plates. Conversations broke into whispers around the room. One by one, guests picked up their coats, offering awkward nods instead of goodbyes. No one knew exactly what to say after watching a wedding unravel without a single raised voice. Emily never moved from her chair. She still held the papers Denise had prepared. Chase stood a few feet away, pacing. Emily, he said for what had to be the 5th time, none of this proves anything. She didn't answer. He looked at me. You've poisoned her against my family. No, Denise replied before I could speak. Documents don't poison people. Lies do. Glenn rose from his chair. We're leaving. Marcia slipped her purse over her shoulder without looking at anyone. She had walked into the restaurant looking composed and confident. Now she wouldn't even meet Patricia's eyes. As they reached the doorway, Patricia called after her. You know what bothered me most all these years? Marcia stopped but didn't turn around. It wasn't that mistakes happened. Patricia's voice remained calm. It was that you taught everyone to fear the truth more than the mistakes. Marcia hesitated only a moment before walking out. Glenn followed. Neither looked back. Chase stayed. He walked directly to Emily and knelt beside her chair. Baby. She slowly raised her eyes. You know me. I thought I did. You do. He reached for her hand. She pulled it away. Did you know about Prairie Willow? He hesitated. Just 1 second. It was enough. I knew my parents owned the facility years ago, and you never told me. It wasn't relevant. Emily laughed once. It wasn't a happy sound. You let me believe your parents lived out of state. I was protecting you. No. She shook her head. You were protecting yourself. His expression hardened. You are making a mistake. She stood. I already did. Saturday morning arrived strangely quiet. No florist trucks pulled into the venue. No hairstylists hurried through hotel hallways. No music echoed inside the chapel. Instead, phones rang. Emily called the wedding planner just after 8. Then the caterer. Then the photographer. Every cancellation carried another financial penalty. By noon, almost everyone who had planned to attend had heard that the wedding was off. Not through gossip. Through simple facts. The ceremony has been canceled. No explanations. No accusations. Just reality. The following week moved much more slowly. Denise stayed busy, not filing dramatic lawsuits, not calling television stations. She simply forwarded publicly available documents and newly volunteered statements to the appropriate attorneys and regulatory offices. Something interesting happened after the rehearsal dinner. People started talking. One of Chase's business associates contacted Denise first. He admitted Mercer Holdings had approached investors using projected family asset transfers as evidence of future liquidity. A second investor confirmed the same thing. Then another phone call came, this one from an elderly widow in Cedar Rapids. She had seen one of the newspaper stories that quietly followed the canceled wedding. She believed Mercer Holdings had pressured her into selling property below market value. She wasn't looking for revenge. She simply wanted someone to listen. Others followed. None of them alone proved fraud. Together, they painted a picture that investigators could no longer ignore. The legal process moved exactly the way real life usually does. Slowly, carefully, without dramatic courtroom speeches. Civil attorneys reopened old questions. Financial records were requested. Business relationships began falling apart. 2 pending investment deals involving Chase collapsed before the end of the month. Actions have a way of catching up with people once enough light reaches them. Emily didn't visit for 12 days. I counted without meaning to. On the 13th afternoon, I heard a familiar Honda pull into my driveway. She stepped out wearing an old gray hoodie from Iowa State. No makeup, hair pulled back. She looked 29. She also looked 19, like the girl who had cried in this same driveway after losing her mother. I opened the front door before she reached it. "Hi, Dad." "Hi." Neither of us moved. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry." I stepped aside. "Come in." We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd opened Nora's file box. For several minutes, neither of us touched the coffee I'd poured. Emily stared at the mug. "I kept trying to convince myself you were overreacting." "I know. I thought you hated Chase." "I never hated him." I looked out the window. "I feared him." She nodded slowly. "I should have listened. You should have asked more questions." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I lied to you." "You did." "I thought if everyone just got through the wedding." She couldn't finish. "I know." She looked around the kitchen. "So much of Mom is still here?" I smiled faintly. I wasn't ready to move everything. "I'm glad you didn't." After another long silence, she cleared her throat. "I owe money." I wasn't surprised. "Cancellation fees?" She nodded. "I've paid what I can." Then she looked at me with the same hopeful expression I'd seen since she was a little girl, asking for help with homework. I was wondering. She couldn't finish the sentence. I understood anyway. I love my daughter. That was exactly why I answered the way I did. "I already paid what I promised." She lowered her eyes. "I know." "I'm not paying the rest." She nodded once, not angrily, just sadly. "I understand. I'll help you make a budget. I'll help you find a counselor. I'll help you rebuild." I reached across the table. "But I won't use my pension or your mother's memory to rescue you from choices you made after you stopped listening." She cried quietly. "I don't deserve that kindness." "This isn't kindness." I squeezed her hand. "It's a boundary." Over the next few weeks, things changed. Emily found a smaller apartment. She started seeing a therapist Denise recommended. She took a second job doing freelance marketing until the remaining wedding bills were paid. We had dinner together most Sundays. Some meals were easy. Others were painfully quiet. Healing, I learned, rarely happens all at once. It happens one honest conversation at a time. About a month later, I drove to the cemetery. The morning air carried the first hint of autumn. White chrysanthemums rested on the passenger seat beside me. Norah always loved simple flowers. "They don't try too hard," she'd once said. I knelt as carefully as my knee allowed. "Hi, sweetheart." The breeze stirred the trees behind me. I finally used my voice. I smiled. "Took me long enough?" I told her about Emily, about the canceled wedding, about Patricia, about Denise, about how frightened I'd been that protecting our daughter would cost me our daughter. Then I sat there in silence. Not because I had nothing left to say, because I finally felt she already knew. These days the house is still quiet. My truck is still old. My knee still predicts the weather better than the local news. But something inside me has changed. For years I confused sacrifice with love. I believed being a good father meant saying yes often enough that my daughter would never feel hardship. I was wrong. Sometimes the greatest protection a parent can give is the courage to say no before it's too late. I still love Emily with everything I have. That never changed. What changed was my understanding that love without boundaries eventually becomes permission. And permission is exactly what people like Chase spend their lives looking for. Reflection. Looking back, I don't think the greatest victory was that the wedding never happened. It was that the truth finally had room to breathe. I couldn't change what happened to Norah, but I could refuse to let silence harm the people I still loved. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and speaking the truth, you know how difficult that decision can be. I'd love to hear what you would have done in my place. Thank you for spending this time with me.